As the late afternoon sun painted the sky in shades of orange and violet, casting long shadows across the perfectly manicured gardens surrounding the Monroe estate, Alexander Monroe watched from his upstairs balcony. He held a glass of Merlot in his aged hand. At 75, he had achieved all the wealth any man could desire, yet his soul felt hollow. The mansion, with its 20 opulent rooms, grand halls, and a priceless art collection, stood as a silent testament to his financial triumphs. But on this evening, the profound quiet was unsettling. He decided to take a walk through the gardens, a ritual he'd adopted to escape the loneliness of his luxurious home. The cool evening air was a slight comfort as he strolled along the illuminated pathways. It was then that he noticed a figure, a slumped woman near the estate's wrought iron gates. He approached slowly and saw she was asleep on a stone bench, her clothes thin and worn, a simple backpack at her side. "Ma'am?" Alexander said softly, careful not to startle her. The woman stirred, her eyes fluttering open. She looked confused at first, then a wave of alarm crossed her face as she instinctively clutched her backpack. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to trespass," she said quickly, scrambling to her feet as if to leave. "Wait," Alexander said, holding up a gentle hand. "It's all right. You look like you could use some help." The woman paused, hesitant, but a flicker of hope entered her eyes as she studied Alexander's kind face. She appeared to be in her 42nd, though life had clearly etched years of hardship onto her features. "I'm Alexander Monroe," he continued with a gentle smile. "You're on my property. Why don't you come inside for a cup of hot tea and rest for a while?" The woman hesitated, biting her lip. "I really don't want to be a bother," she whispered. "It's no bother at all," Alexander said, his voice calm and reassuring. "Frankly, I'd enjoy the company." After a few seconds of internal debate, the woman slowly nodded. "Thank you," she said softly. "I'm Eleanor." As Alexander led Eleanor into his grand home, he noticed her quiet awe at the lavish interiors. They went straight to the kitchen, where Mrs. Davis, the housekeeper, was finishing her cleaning. "Mrs. Davis, could you please prepare some tea and a few sandwiches for our guest?" Alexander requested politely. Mrs. Davis glanced at Eleanor with a flicker of curiosity, but responded immediately. "Of course, Mr. Monroe. Right away." While Mrs. Davis prepared the food, Alexander invited Eleanor to sit at the large kitchen island. In the brighter light, he could see her more clearly. Her brown hair was disheveled, and there were deep, dark circles under her eyes. Despite her exhausted appearance, Alexander saw a resilient intelligence and determination in her gaze. "Have you been without a home for long?" Alexander asked gently. Eleanor avoided his eyes, her voice low. "A few weeks," she admitted. "I had to leave my last situation unexpectedly. I found myself with nowhere to go." Alexander nodded with sympathy. "You can stay here tonight," he offered. "I have plenty of guest rooms. Tomorrow we can talk about how to help you get back on your feet." Tears welled in Eleanor's eyes. "Why are you being so kind to me? You don't even know me," she asked. Alexander offered a sad smile. "I've been blessed with more than enough in my life. Helping someone in need is the very least I can do." Just then, Mrs. Davis returned with a tray bearing hot tea and sandwiches. Eleanor began to eat, a visible wave of relief washing over her. Alexander watched, wondering what trials had brought her to this point. After she had eaten, Alexander showed her to one of the guest rooms upstairs, a beautiful space decorated in soft blues and creams. "I hope you'll be comfortable here," Alexander said. "There's an ensuite bathroom, and it's stocked with everything you might need. Please, make yourself at home." Eleanor stared around the room in disbelief. "You've been too good to me," she said softly. "I don't know how I can ever thank you." "Just get a good night's rest," Alexander replied with a gentle smile. "We can talk about everything tomorrow." He closed the door behind him, a strange mix of emotions swirling within him. He felt concern for Eleanor, but also a fresh sense of purpose that had been absent from his life for a very long time. Perhaps in helping her, he could also help fill the void in his own soul. The next morning, Alexander found Eleanor in the kitchen, speaking quietly with Mrs. Davis over coffee. A night of proper rest had visibly revived her. She had showered and was wearing clean clothes provided by the housekeeper. "Good morning," Alexander greeted, joining them at the table. "I trust you slept well." Eleanor nodded. "More soundly than I have in years," she said. "Mr. Monroe, your kindness is overwhelming, but I can't impose any longer. You've already done too much. Alexander studied her, tilting his head slightly. And where will you go from here? Uncertainty clouded Eleanor's face. Alexander continued in a gentle tone. I've had an idea. There's a small guest house on the property that hasn't been used in years. Why don't you stay there while you get back on your feet? You could even help with some light work around the estate in return. Eleanor's eyes widened in shock. She was nearly speechless. I don't know what to say, she stammered. Just say yes, Alexander urged, a kind smile playing on his lips. I'll admit, my motives are partly selfish. This mansion is far too large for one old man. I'd be glad to have someone else around. Eleanor hesitated, but finally, a slow nod and a small smile broke through her uncertainty. All right, she answered, her voice thick with gratitude. Thank you, Mr. Monroe. I promise you won't regret this. In the weeks that followed, Eleanor moved into the guest house, a cozy two-bedroom cottage with a spacious living area and a small kitchen. Alexander encouraged her to decorate it as she wished, and slowly, it began to take on her personal touch. Alexander found her presence a delight. She was not only intelligent and kind, but her conversation was always stimulating. During their frequent shared meals, however, he noticed Eleanor was adept at deflecting questions about her past, always keeping her narrative vague. One afternoon, about a month after she had moved in, Alexander found Eleanor in the garden, staring intently at the rose bushes. A penny for your thoughts, Alexander said gently, approaching her. Eleanor started slightly, then smiled. Oh, just thinking about the past, she replied. About what? He prodded carefully. She hesitated for a moment before taking a deep breath. Painting, she admitted. I used to be a painter, a long time ago. Alexander's interest was piqued. Really? What did you paint? A bit of everything, she responded, a wistful note in her voice. But mostly portraits and landscapes. There's a kind of magic in capturing a person's soul, or the beauty of a place, on canvas. Why did you stop? Alexander asked softly. Eleanor's expression clouded over. It's complicated, she said quietly. Let's just say I had to leave that part of my life behind. Alexander nodded, sensing her reluctance to elaborate, but an idea was already forming in his mind. The next day, Alexander led Eleanor to a room in the main house she had never seen before. It was a large, bright space with expansive windows that flooded it with natural light. What is this room? Eleanor asked, intrigued as she looked around. Alexander gave her a meaningful smile. This was my late wife Eleanor's studio. She was a magnificent painter, he explained. Eleanor's eyes widened as she took in the neatly arranged easels, tubes of paint, and brushes lining the shelves. She started to speak, but Alexander stopped her gently. Please, call me Alexander, he said. And this studio, it's yours if you want it. Eleanor was stunned. I couldn't possibly accept this, she stammered, completely taken aback. You can, and you will, Alexander said firmly. It's been sitting dormant for far too long. It would be an honor to see it come to life again, especially in the hands of someone so clearly passionate. Tears formed in Eleanor's eyes. You haven't even seen any of my work, she said softly. Alexander smiled, his expression warm and comforting. I don't need to see your work to recognize your passion, Eleanor. I see it in your eyes every time you speak of it. Slowly, Eleanor walked towards an easel. She ran her fingers over the tubes of paint, then picked up a brush, turning it over in her hands thoughtfully. I don't even know if I remember how, she whispered. There's only one way to find out, Alexander encouraged gently. That evening, Eleanor didn't appear for dinner. Worried, Alexander went up to the studio to check on her. He found her completely absorbed, brush in hand, with streaks of color on her face and clothes. She was the very picture of intense artistic concentration. Alexander paused at the doorway, watching the quiet dedication on her face. After a moment, he backed away silently, leaving her to her rediscovered peace. Over the next few weeks, the studio became Eleanor's sanctuary. Alexander made sure never to intrude, content to observe from a distance and notice the change in her. Her eyes shone with a vitality he hadn't seen before, and there was a new energy in her step. Nearly 2 months after Alexander gave her the studio, he was surprised by a knock on his office door. Come in, he called, looking up from his paperwork. Eleanor entered, a mixture of nervousness and determination on her face. "Alexander," she began, her voice slightly hesitant, "I have something I'd like to show you, if you have a moment." Intrigued, Alexander stood and followed her to the studio. When they arrived, she led him to an easel covered with a cloth. "This is the first portrait I've finished in a very long time," Eleanor said softly, pulling away the covering. Alexander stopped, speechless. Before him was his own image, seated in his favorite armchair in the library, but it was more than a mere likeness. Eleanor had captured something deeper, a hint of the melancholy in his eyes, layered with the kindness and fortitude that defined him. "Eleanor?" he finally breathed. "This is magnificent." A faint blush colored Eleanor's cheeks. "You really think so?" "I don't just think so, I know so," Alexander assured her, his gaze still fixed on the artwork. "You have a true gift, Eleanor. It shouldn't be hidden away." Eleanor looked down at the floor, seeming hesitant. "I don't think I'm ready to share my work with the world." Alexander turned to her, placing his hands gently on her shoulders. "You are more than ready," he said with conviction. "In fact, I have an idea." Over the next few months, Alexander worked quietly behind the scenes, using his connections in the art world. Meanwhile, Eleanor poured her soul into her art, creating a stunning collection of portraits and landscapes. Then, one quiet Friday evening as they were having dinner on the veranda, Alexander sprang his surprise. "I have something for you," he said as dessert arrived, producing an envelope. Eleanor looked at him, puzzled. "What is it?" she murmured. Alexander's smile widened as he handed it to her. "Open it." With trembling hands, Eleanor opened the envelope and scanned the contents. Her eyes grew wide with astonishment. Is this an invitation to an exhibition?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Your own exhibition," Alexander confirmed, his grin growing even wider, "and not just anywhere. At one of the most prestigious galleries in Soho. They were blown away by the photos of your work I sent them." Eleanor looked as if she couldn't process the news. "How? When is this?" she asked, trying to grasp the reality of it. "1 month from today," Alexander replied. "That should give us enough time to prepare everything." Eleanor stared at the invitation, then back at Alexander, as if trying to make sense of it all. Finally, her voice trembling with emotion, she spoke. "Alexander, I don't know. She trailed off, searching for the right words. "This is more than anything I ever thought could happen to me." Alexander's expression softened. "You deserve this, Eleanor. Your talent deserves to be celebrated." Tears streamed down Eleanor's cheeks. "You don't understand," she whispered. "I thought my painting days were over forever. The idea of having my own show." Alexander gently reached across the table and took her hand. "Life has a way of giving us second chances, Eleanor. We just have to be brave enough to take them." Slowly, Eleanor nodded, her tears gradually giving way to a smile. "You're right," she said, her voice growing stronger. "I'm going to take this chance with everything I have." The following weeks were a flurry of activity. Eleanor dedicated herself to her art, perfecting her existing pieces and creating new ones for the show. Alexander handled the logistics, coordinating with the gallery and making arrangements. As the exhibition day approached, the change in Eleanor was undeniable. She carried herself with a newfound confidence and radiance, as if the very act of painting had resurrected her spirit. On the night of the opening, the gallery was buzzing with energy. Art enthusiasts and critics mingled, admiring her work and praising its depth and beauty. Eleanor, stunning in a simple blue dress, moved gracefully among the guests, her eyes shining with joy. From the side, Alexander watched her, filled with pride at her transformation. It was then that he noticed an older man, his face lined and his hair graying, staring at Eleanor with a look of stunned recognition. The man's intense gaze caught Alexander's attention. He saw Eleanor's eyes meet the man's, and her reaction was immediate and profound. Her conversation stopped, and her eyes widened. "Mark?" she whispered, almost inaudibly. The man, Mark, slowly approached, a cautious smile on his face. "Eleanor," he said softly, "it's been a long time." Sensing the gravity of the moment, Alexander moved closer, ready to offer support. Eleanor's voice trembled as she replied, "I never thought I'd see you here." Mark gestured to the vibrant paintings on the walls. "I saw the announcement for the exhibition. I couldn't believe it. After all these years, your art is still as breathtaking as ever." A shadow passed over Eleanor's face, hinting at a deeper, unfinished story between them. "Thank you," she answered quietly. "I'd given up painting for a long time. I only recently started again." Mark's expression was understanding. "I figured as much. After you disappeared," he paused, noticing her discomfort. "I'm sorry. I don't mean to bring up old wounds. I'm just so happy to see you painting again, to see that you're okay." At this point, Alexander felt it was time to step in. "Excuse me," he said with a polite interruption. "I see you two know each other. I'm Alexander Monroe, a friend of Eleanor's." Mark extended his hand. "Mark Fisher. We were in art school together, a lifetime ago." Alexander didn't miss the grateful look Eleanor shot him. "A pleasure to meet you, Mr. Fisher," he said warmly. "Perhaps we could all get coffee sometime." I'm sure Eleanor would appreciate the chance to catch up properly. Eleanor hesitated but gave a slight nod. "Yes, I'd like that," she managed, forcing a smile. Mark and Alexander quickly exchanged contact information before Mark went to admire more of the art. Once he was out of earshot, Eleanor turned to Alexander, her eyes filled with suppressed emotion. "Thank you," she said softly. Alexander placed a reassuring hand on her arm. "It's all right," he replied. "You don't have to explain anything. Tonight is about celebrating you." Eleanor took a deep breath, nodded, and turned back to her guests, her smile more genuine this time. The evening was a resounding success. Several pieces were sold, and critics raved about her work. After the last guest had departed, Eleanor collapsed into a chair, exhausted but glowing with happiness. "We did it," she said to Alexander, her face radiant. Alexander sat beside her, smiling back. "No, Eleanor, you did this. This was all you." Eleanor shook her head. "I couldn't have done it without you, Alexander. You gave me the second chance I'd stopped looking for." Alexander took her hand, squeezing it warmly. "You deserve all the second chances the world can offer, my dear friend, and I have a feeling this is just the beginning for you." In the peaceful days following her successful exhibition, Eleanor seemed to be floating on a wave of contentment, buoyed by positive reviews and inquiries from other galleries. Yet, Alexander noticed moments when she would retreat into herself, her thoughts silently turning, likely stirred by Mark's unexpected reappearance. About a week later, he found her in the garden, staring into the distance as if seeing something far beyond the horizon. Alexander sat down quietly on the bench beside her. "Penny for your thoughts," he offered, his voice gentle. Eleanor gave a small start, then offered a faint smile. "Sorry, just lost in thought." "About Mark?" Alexander asked softly. Eleanor took a deep breath, running a hand through her hair. "Not just him. About everything, really." She paused, then seemed to come to a decision. "Alexander, I think it's time I told you about my past. Everything I went through." She began, a tremor of hesitation in her voice. Alexander placed a supportive hand on hers. "You don't owe me any explanations, Eleanor, but I'm here to listen if you're ready to share." Taking a steadying breath, Eleanor began. "I met Mark in art school. We were young, full of passion for art and for life. He was my best friend, my confidant. For a while, I thought we might even become something more." Eleanor's gaze drifted away, lost in memory. "Then I met Richard. He was older, charismatic, and an established art collector. He seemed to understand and appreciate my work in a way no one else had." As Alexander listened, he noticed a subtle shift in her tone at the mention of Richard's name. At first, it was a fairy tale. "Richard swept me into his world, introduced me to influential people, helped me build my career. We were married in a whirlwind. I was completely in love with him, blind to the truth." Eleanor's voice broke, the weight of the memory heavy upon her, but it didn't take long for his true nature to emerge. He became controlling, possessive. He would belittle my work, telling me I owed all my success to him. Slowly, he cut me off from everyone I cared about, including Mark. Alexander felt a slow burn of anger, but remained silent, a steadfast presence as she continued. "Then I discovered his secrets, his illegal dealings, art forgery, money laundering. When I confronted him, he became violent." Her voice cracked, and a tear escaped, tracing a path down her cheek. Alexander tightened his grip on her hand, a silent anchor. "I ran away that night," she continued, her voice a whisper. "I left everything behind, my art, my career, my entire life. I was terrified Richard would find me if I tried to contact anyone. So I just vanished. Her story hung in the air between them, a stark portrait of her past painted in words. Alexander was moved by her courage and resilience. He squeezed her hand again, a sign of his unwavering support. "You're safe now, Eleanor," he said, his voice firm yet gentle. "You're not alone anymore." As they sat together, the garden around them seemed to fall silent, bearing witness to the strength it takes to trust and share the deepest of wounds. Eleanor slowly wiped her tears away, her voice gaining a bit of strength as she continued. For years, she had lived like a shadow, moving from city to city, surviving on odd jobs. In all that time, she couldn't bring herself to pick up a paintbrush. It felt like the part of her soul that loved art had died. She faced Alexander, her eyes brimming with emotion. "And then I met you. You didn't just give me a place to live. You gave me a chance to find myself again, to come back to my painting." Alexander's own eyes misted over. In a soft tone, he replied, "Oh, Eleanor, it pains me to think of all you've endured. You are an incredibly brave and strong woman." Eleanor gave a sad smile. "I don't feel very strong. I'm still scared, Alexander. Scared that Richard will find out about the exhibition. Scared I'll lose everything all over again." Alexander held her hands firmly. "Eleanor, listen to me. You are not alone this time. I am here, and I will watch over you. No one is going to hurt you again." Her gaze was grateful, but a trace of fear remained. What if he finds out? What if he comes after me? Alexander thought for a moment before replying, "Perhaps it's time to stop running from that fear. You can't hide for the rest of your life, Eleanor. Your talent is too great. You have too much to share." Eleanor was hesitant. "I don't know if I can be that brave." "You are braver than you know," Alexander said with confidence, "and I'll be by your side every step of the way. For now, why don't we start by reconnecting with old friends? What do you say we set up that coffee with Mark?" A spark of determination, a resolve Alexander hadn't seen before, flickered in Eleanor's eyes. She sat up straighter. "You're right. I can't let fear rule my life. I need to take it back." Alexander smiled, admiring her fortitude. Exactly. In the days that followed, Alexander watched over Eleanor with a mixture of admiration and concern. Her resolve to face her past was firm, but the emotional toll was undeniable. They arranged to meet Mark for coffee at a quiet cafe downtown on a sunny afternoon. Alexander insisted on accompanying her for support. When they arrived, they found Mark already seated at an outdoor table. His face lit up when he saw Eleanor, but Alexander could also see a complex mix of emotions: joy, concern, and perhaps a touch of regret. "Eleanor," Mark said, standing to greet her warmly, "it's so good to see you again." Eleanor smiled nervously. "Hi, Mark. This is my friend Alexander." After shaking Alexander's hand, Mark looked inquisitively between them. They sat, and a brief, heavy silence settled over the table. Mark was the first to break it. "Eleanor," he began carefully, "I am so sorry for not understanding what was happening, for not being there for you." Eleanor stopped him with a gentle wave of her hand. "It wasn't your fault, Mark. I was the one who pushed everyone away, including you. There was no way for you to know." Mark shook his head, his expression filled with sadness. "I should have tried harder. When you vanished, I was heartbroken. I searched for you for months." Alexander observed their exchange, sensing the depth of their shared history. Eleanor's voice was soft, her gaze fixed on Mark. "What happened after I left?" Mark sighed heavily. "It was a difficult time. We were all so worried. I even hired a private investigator to look for you." Eleanor gasped. "You did?" Mark nodded. "Yes, but he found nothing. It was like you had disappeared off the face of the earth." His eyes misted over. "Eleanor, what really happened? Why did you leave like that?" Eleanor glanced at Alexander, who gave her a supportive nod. She took a deep breath and began to recount the story of Richard's abuse and her desperate escape. Mark listened in silence, his face a mask of shock and anger. When she finished, he reached across the table and took her hand. "Oh, Eleanor," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm so sorry. If I had known, I would have done anything to help you." Eleanor managed a sad smile. "I know, Mark. But at the time, I couldn't trust anyone. I was too scared." At this point, Alexander spoke up. "Mark," he asked gently. Do you know anything about Richard's whereabouts now? Mark frowned in thought. Last I heard, about a year ago, he was still active in the art scene. There were whispers of shady deals and forgeries. Eleanor's face fell. So he's still out there, she whispered. Alexander placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Don't worry, Eleanor. We're here now. We won't let him hurt you again. Mark nodded emphatically. Alexander's right. You're not alone anymore, Eleanor. We're here for you. Tears of gratitude shone in Eleanor's eyes as she looked between the two men. Thank you, she whispered. I don't know what I'd do without you both. The rest of the afternoon was filled with reminiscences and future plans. Mark shared stories from their art school days that made Eleanor laugh. As they parted ways, Mark gave Eleanor a long hug. Don't be a stranger this time, he whispered. Promise you'll stay in touch. I promise, Eleanor smiled through her tears. The drive home was quiet, Eleanor seemingly lost in thought. Alexander gave her space, knowing she was processing the day's emotions. It wasn't until they arrived back at the estate that Eleanor broke the silence. Alexander, she began hesitantly, there's something else I have to tell you. Something I've been afraid to say. Alexander turned to her, his expression calm and encouraging. What is it, Eleanor? She took a deep breath. I have a daughter, Alexander. Her name is Lucy. She's 16 now. Alexander was stunned. A daughter? He repeated. Eleanor nodded, fresh tears streaming down her face. When I fled from Richard, Lucy was only 3. I left her with my best friend, Teresa. I knew I couldn't take care of her on the run. I was terrified Richard would use her to find me. Alexander's heart ached for her. Oh, Eleanor, he said softly. That must have been unbearable. It was the hardest decision of my life, she explained, but it was the only way to keep her safe. Teresa promised to raise her as her own and keep my location a secret. Have you had any contact? Alexander asked carefully. Eleanor shook her head. Not directly. Teresa sends me photos and updates through a secure email account we set up. But Lucy doesn't know I'm her mother. She thinks Teresa is her aunt and that her parents died in an accident. Alexander quietly absorbed the weight of her words before taking her hands in his. Eleanor, you made an impossible choice out of love and necessity. Do not blame yourself for that. Eleanor's eyes held both gratitude and fear. Now that I'm slowly rebuilding my life, do I even have the right to come back into hers? What if she hates me for leaving? Alexander squeezed her hands gently. Lucy has a right to know who you are, and you have a right to be her mother again. It won't be easy, but I will be here to support you every step of the way. Eleanor fell into his arms, sobbing on his shoulder, his steady presence a source of quiet strength. When her tears subsided, Alexander suggested softly, Let's start by reaching out to Teresa. We can arrange a meeting and explain everything to Lucy, gently. Eleanor nodded, a new resolve in her voice. Yes, it's time. Lucy deserves to know the truth. In the following days, Alexander helped Eleanor carefully plan the reunion. They spoke with Teresa, who was overjoyed to learn Eleanor was safe and eager to help reconnect mother and daughter. It was decided that a face-to-face meeting was the best approach. On the day of the meeting, Eleanor was a bundle of nerves as they drove to a local park, Alexander, a silent pillar of strength beside her. They saw Teresa and a teenage girl with dark hair in the distance. Eleanor froze, but Alexander squeezed her hand. You can do this, he whispered. Lucy looked at Eleanor with a flicker of vague recognition in her eyes. Lucy, Teresa began softly. This is Eleanor. She's your mother. Shock, pain, and a glimmer of hope warred on Lucy's face. My mother? She repeated quietly. Eleanor stepped forward, her legs heavy, tears streaming down her cheeks. Yes, Lucy, it's me. I know you must be angry and confused, but please let me explain. The conversation that followed was raw and emotional. Eleanor poured out her story, explaining the reasons for her departure and the years of secrecy. Lucy listened quietly, her own emotions a tumultuous mix. From a distance, Alexander watched, feeling the immense weight and potential of this reunion. As their talk wound down, Lucy's gaze on Eleanor was still filled with hurt, but also with a dawning understanding. The path to forgiveness would be long, but it was there. I need some time, Lucy whispered. Eleanor wiped her own tears. Of course, sweetheart. Take all the time you need. I'll be here whenever you're ready." Lucy paused. Then, in a sudden move, she stepped forward and gave Eleanor a quick, tentative hug, a gesture filled with future promise. After Lucy and Teresa had left, an emotionally drained Eleanor leaned against Alexander, exhausted but holding onto a fragile sliver of hope. "It's going to be all right," he said softly, stroking her hair. "Just give it time." Over the next few weeks, the bond between Eleanor and Lucy slowly began to heal, progressing from tentative text messages to phone calls and, eventually, regular meetings. Alexander watched with joy as Eleanor blossomed, not just as a mother, but in her art as well. She began a series of paintings that charted her emotional journey of reconnecting with her daughter. One afternoon, as Alexander was admiring her latest piece, a vibrant portrait of Lucy, he found himself reflecting on his own life. At 75, he felt a renewed purpose in helping Eleanor and Lucy, as if a hole in his life he never knew existed was being filled. Just then, Eleanor entered the studio, her face alight with joy. "Alexander," she said brightly, "Lucy wants to meet you. She's eager to get to know the man who has meant so much to her mother's healing." Alexander's heart warmed at her words. "I would be honored," he replied with a smile. Eleanor came closer, taking his hands in hers. "Alexander," she began slowly, "there's something I need to share with you, something I've only just discovered and, well, it changes everything." Alexander's expression turned to one of concern. "What is it, Eleanor?" She took a deep breath, her gaze locked on his. "Do you remember when I told you about my late husband Frank, Lucy's father?" Alexander nodded, sensing an unexpected turn. "Well," Eleanor continued, her voice trembling slightly, "before we met, Frank had another child, a son he had to give up for adoption when he was very young." A current of emotion shot through Alexander, a strange mix of surprise and anticipation. "Eleanor, what are you trying to tell me?" he asked, his own voice now unsteady. Tears fell down Eleanor's cheeks as she delivered the stunning truth. Alexander, Frank's son, the child he had to give away, was named Alexander. He was born exactly 75 years ago. The room seemed to spin. Alexander grabbed the edge of a table for support, his mind reeling. I am," he stammered. Eleanor affirmed his unspoken question, her own tears flowing freely. "Oh, Alexander, you are Frank's son. You are my stepson." Overwhelmed, Alexander sank into a chair. He had always felt a void, a question mark about his origins and the parents he'd never known. Now, at 75, he was learning that family had been closer than he could have ever imagined. "How?" he asked, his voice trembling. "How did you find this out?" Eleanor knelt beside him, taking his hands. "After I reconnected with Lucy, I started going through old memories, old papers. I found Frank's journal, which I hadn't touched since he died. He wrote about the son he had to give away. The dates, the name, everything matched." "But why didn't you tell me sooner?" Alexander asked, still in shock. "I had to be sure," Eleanor replied softly. "I had the records verified, Alexander. There's no doubt you are Frank's son." Stunned, Alexander looked into her tear-filled eyes. The pieces of his identity were slowly clicking into place. "And Lucy," he began, "she's my granddaughter." Eleanor smiled through a mixture of tears and joy. "And I am technically your stepmother, though our relationship is far more complicated than that." A soft, disbelieving laugh escaped Alexander's lips as the full weight of the situation settled in. At 75 years old, he had discovered that the woman he had saved was his family. Eleanor hugged him gently. "Alexander, I know this is a lot to take in, but I want you to know that this changes nothing about how much I care for you. You saved my life. You gave me a new beginning. You were my family long before we knew this." Alexander looked into her eyes, the truth of her words resonating deep within him. "Family," he whispered, the word tasting new and full of meaning. He wrapped his arms around her, feeling the release of a lifelong burden. When they pulled apart, he wiped his eyes, a tentative smile on his face. "Well," he said, "it seems we have a lot to discuss with Lucy." Eleanor laughed. "Yes, we do. She's gonna be as shocked as you are." In the following days, Alexander navigated a storm of emotions, profound joy at his discovery, and a quiet sadness for the years lost. Eleanor was his constant guide, sharing stories of Frank, helping Alexander piece together the past he never knew. The meeting with Lucy was overwhelming. The girl was initially stunned to learn that the kind man who had helped her mother was, in fact, her grandfather. But past the shock, curiosity took over, and she peppered Alexander with questions. "You're really my grandpa?" Lucy asked, her voice full of awe. Alexander smiled warmly. "I am, and I couldn't be happier to finally meet you." After a moment's hesitation, Lucy threw her arms around him in a tight hug. "I always wanted a grandpa," she said, her voice muffled against his chest. Alexander's heart swelled with love as he hugged his newfound granddaughter. Over Lucy's shoulder, he saw Eleanor watching them, tears of joy in her eyes. As time went on, a new life pulsed through the Monroe estate. Lucy began spending weekends there, her youthful energy bringing light and laughter to the once silent mansion. Eleanor continued to paint, her canvases now filled with scenes of family unity, often featuring Alexander and Lucy. One sunny afternoon, as they relaxed on the veranda, Alexander mused, "You know, if someone had told me a year ago that I would find my family at the age of 75, I would have laughed. But now, I can't imagine my life any other way." Eleanor smiled, taking his hand. "Life has a funny way of surprising us, doesn't it?" Nearby, Lucy, lying on the grass, looked up at them. "Do you think it was fate that brought you two together?" Alexander and Eleanor exchanged a meaningful look. "Whether it was fate or not," Alexander replied, "I am eternally grateful to have found you both." As the sun dipped behind the hills, casting a golden glow over the garden, Alexander felt a profound sense of peace. The void that had haunted his life was finally filled. Here, with his newfound, cherished family, he was finally whole. Their peace was suddenly shattered by the ringing of the doorbell. "I'll get it," Lucy said cheerfully, running inside. Alexander and Eleanor exchanged puzzled glances. A moment later, they heard Lucy's quick footsteps returning. "Grandpa! Grandma Eleanor!" she called, a mix of excitement and nervousness in her voice. "There's a gentleman at the door who wants to speak with you." Alexander stood, a flicker of unease stirring within him, as Lucy was followed onto the veranda by a tall, well-dressed man. When the man's eyes met Eleanor's, a cold smile spread across his face. "Eleanor," he said softly, "it's been a long time." Eleanor's hand shot out, gripping Alexander's arm. "Richard," she whispered, her voice laced with fear. Alexander's protective instincts flared. Before him stood Richard Croft, Eleanor's abusive ex-husband. "What are you doing here?" Alexander demanded, positioning himself between Richard and Eleanor. Richard smirked, amused. "Ah, it seems Eleanor has found herself a new protector. How quaint." He took a step closer, his presence menacing. "I'm here for what's mine. The artwork, Eleanor. The pieces you took when you left." Eleanor stepped forward, her fear warring with defiance. "I didn't steal anything from you, Richard. Those paintings were mine, and they're gone now." Richard laughed, a cold, humorless sound. "But you have something far more valuable now, don't you? I saw the press from your last exhibition. Your work is making waves." His voice dropped, becoming threatening. "I want my cut. I'm the one who made you the artist you are today. Get off my property." "Now," Alexander commanded, his voice steely. But Richard's gaze remained fixed on Eleanor. "You have 1 week to give me half the profits from that show. If you don't..." His eyes shifted to Lucy, who stood pale and wide-eyed with fear. "It would be a shame if something were to happen to this lovely little family of yours." Before anyone could react, Mark Fisher appeared in the garden, flanked by 2 police officers. Richard Croft, one of the officers, said authoritatively, "You're under arrest for tax evasion and art forgery." As the police cuffed a snarling Richard, his face contorted with rage, he glared at Eleanor and hissed, "This isn't over," before being led away. After they were gone, a heavy silence fell. Lucy was the first to break it, rushing to hug Eleanor. "Mom, are you okay?" she asked, her voice trembling. Eleanor held her daughter tight, tears of relief streaming down her face. "Yes, honey, we're okay now. We're finally safe." Alexander walked over to Mark, who looked exhausted but relieved. "How did you know?" he asked. Mark managed a tired smile. "I started digging into Richard after our coffee meeting. I uncovered his illegal activities and tipped off the authorities. They told me he was on his way here, so I rushed over. Alexander clasped Mark's shoulder, his gratitude immense. "Thank you," he said simply, the two words carrying a world of meaning. Later that evening, after Lucy was in bed and Mark had gone, Alexander and Eleanor sat on the veranda, each with a glass of wine. "Is it really over?" Eleanor whispered. Alexander took her hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "Yes, my love. He can't hurt you anymore. You're both safe." Eleanor took a deep breath, as if releasing a weight she had carried for decades. "I never thought I would feel truly free again." Alexander smiled, pulling her into a gentle embrace. "You are stronger than you know, Eleanor. You endured, you triumphed, and you built a new life for yourself and Lucy." Eleanor rested her head on his shoulder. "I couldn't have done it without you, Alexander. You gave us a home, a family." He kissed the top of her head. "And you gave me the same. To think, at 75, I'm only just now finding my true purpose." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the star-dusted sky. After a while, Eleanor's voice, soft but firm, broke the quiet. "Alexander," she said, "I think it's time I create a new masterpiece. One that tells our whole story. The trials and the triumphs, what was lost and what was found. A painting to show that even in the darkest of nights, the dawn will always come." Alexander smiled, his heart full of love and admiration. "I think that's a wonderful idea, my love, and I can't wait to see it." Under the glittering stars, they felt a sense of peace and completion they had never known before. Their journey had not been easy, but every hardship had led them to this moment, a moment filled with love, family, and above all, hope for the days to come. The future was a blank canvas, and together, they were ready to paint it.